The streets of Ziveris Prime were on fire that night. Screams filled the air, echoing through the towering structures of the capital city. The royal convoy, which had once moved in elegance through the shining roads of the empire, was now trapped in the middle of chaos. The rebels had struck without warning, attacking with weapons stolen from the very empire they sought to destroy. Inside the central transport, Princess Lizara sat frozen, her golden eyes wide with fear. She was only 12 years old then, a child who had never known true danger. Outside, the royal guards fought fiercely, but the enemy was relentless. The Zyrithian Empire had ruled for centuries, believing itself untouchable. But tonight, that belief was crumbling. A sharp explosion rocked the ground, and the transport shook violently. The princess screamed as the door was torn open, revealing a rebel soldier. His armor was dented and stained, his eyes filled with hatred. He raised his weapon toward her. Lizara braced for the end. And then he appeared. A dark figure moved like lightning, faster than her eyes could follow. The rebel barely had time to react before a blade sliced through the air, knocking the weapon from his hands. In one swift motion, the attacker was thrown back, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Lizara stared in shock at her savior. He was human, a species often looked down upon in the empire. Unlike the towering Zarithians, humans were smaller, weaker, or so the nobles claimed. But this one was different. He stood tall, his dark armor scratched from battle, his face partially hidden beneath a metal mask. His eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the battlefield before locking onto hers. "Can you run?" he asked, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. Lizara nodded, unable to speak. "Then stay close," he said, turning toward the battle. Outside, the fighting was getting worse. The guards were losing, and the rebels were pushing forward. The human didn't hesitate. He moved through the battlefield like a shadow, striking with precision and speed. Every enemy that came near fell before they could react. It was unlike anything Lizara had ever seen. They reached an alleyway where a hidden escape passage awaited. But just as they were about to enter, a rebel leader spotted them. He was a Zyrethian warrior, towering over the human by at least 2 heads. He let out a snarl, drawing a massive energy blade. "You think a mere human can stand against me?" the rebel growled. The human didn't answer. He simply raised his own blade, a simple but well-worn weapon. The rebel laughed and charged. Lizara's heart pounded as the fight began. The rebel struck first, his attacks powerful and brutal. But the human was faster. He dodged every swing, stepping in and out of range with perfect timing. Then, in a sudden blur of movement, he struck. The rebel gasped as the human's blade found its mark, cutting through his defenses. With a final blow, the warrior fell, his weapon clattering to the ground. Lizara could hardly believe it. A human had defeated a Zarethian elite warrior, something unheard of in the empire. The human turned to her. "We need to move." She followed him through the escape passage, her mind racing with questions. Who was he? Why was he helping her? Finally, they emerged in a safe zone far from the battle. For years, she had searched for him. Who was he? Where did he go? No one had the answers. And so she waited, hoping that fate would one day bring him back. The announcer's voice echoed through the arena. Let the tournament begin. The battles were fierce. Zyrithian champions, cybernetic gladiators, and alien warlords clashed with brutal skill. One by one, the weakest fell. The crowd roared with each victory, their hunger for combat growing stronger. But then, something changed. A new warrior stepped into the ring. A human. The audience went silent for a moment, then erupted into laughter. The human, competing against the strongest in the galaxy. It was absurd. The nobles scoffed, and the generals shook their heads. But Lizara leaned forward. Something about this warrior felt familiar. His armor was dark and battle-worn, his face hidden behind a helmet. The name on the records was simple: Orion. No family, no history, nothing. He was a mystery. The first match began. Orion's opponent was a massive reptilian warrior, twice his size and covered in armor. The crowd expected the fight to end in seconds. They were wrong. The reptilian warrior swung his hammer with incredible force. Orion dodged at the last second, moving like a shadow. The hammer slammed into the ground, cracking the stone, but Orion was already behind him. With a swift strike, he knocked the warrior off balance, then delivered a final blow that sent him crashing down. The crowd gasped. "A lucky win," someone muttered. But then Orion won again, and again. He defeated a cybernetic soldier in mere seconds. He took down an elite Cyrethian warrior with precise movements, never wasting a single step. His fighting style was unlike anything they had seen. It was fast, efficient, deadly. Lizara's hands tightened around the armrest of her throne. Could it be him? The final match arrived. Orion stood against the last challenger, a royal champion, trained in the highest levels of combat. The fight was brutal, but in the end, Orion won. The arena fell into stunned silence. A human had won the grand tournament. The announcer hesitated, then spoke. "By right of victory, the champion may request one boon from the royal family." All eyes turned to Lizara. What would a human dare to ask? Lizara stood tall, her golden eyes sharp with authority. She did not flinch as the nobles shouted their objections. "This is an insult to our traditions," one elder snarled. "A human cannot be trusted with such a high position." Another noble spat. Even General Karen, the leader of the royal army, stepped forward. "Your Highness, I beg you to reconsider. The guardian of the throne must be the strongest among us, the human." "Just proved he is stronger than every warrior in this empire," Lizara interrupted, her voice firm. The court fell silent. Orion stood in the center of the throne room, calm and unshaken despite the hostility around him. His face was partially covered in scars, his dark hair slightly tousled from battle, but his sharp eyes held no fear. He had faced death too many times to be afraid of words. Lizara turned to him. "Do you accept this title?" Orion met her gaze, his expression unreadable. 1,000 memories flashed through his mind. His years of fighting, surviving in a galaxy that saw humans as nothing. But then he remembered the little girl he had saved all those years ago. He had never expected to see her again, much less as a ruler willing to stand up for him. Finally, he nodded. "I do." The nobles murmured in disbelief, but Lizara smiled. "It is decided," she declared. A challenge of strength. Though Lizara's word was law, the opposition did not end. General Karen stepped forward again, his face hard with determination. "If this human is to be your guardian," he said coldly, "let him prove it once more." Lizara's eyes narrowed. "He already has." "I do not doubt his skill," Karen said, glancing at Orion with measured respect. "But skill alone is not enough. A guardian must prove his loyalty, his dedication to the Empire. Let him face one final challenge." Lizara exhaled slowly, considering. She knew Karen was testing Orion, but she also understood the importance of gaining the trust of her people. If Orion refused, they would never accept him. She turned to Orion. "Will you accept this challenge?" Orion smirked slightly, as if the idea amused him. "What are the rules?" Karen gestured toward the arena outside. "A test of strength, endurance, and strategy. You will face 3 of the finest Cyrethian warriors at the same time. No weapons, no armor. If you win, you will have our respect." Lizara's fingers curled around the armrest of her throne. It was unfair, but she knew Orion would not refuse. Sure enough, Orion simply rolled his shoulders and stepped forward. "Let's get this over with." The trial begins. The arena was packed once again, but this time, there was no laughter. The nobles and generals watched with serious expressions. If Orion won, they would have no choice but to accept him. His three opponents entered the arena, towering Xyrithians, each twice his size, their muscles rippling with power. Orion stood still, analyzing them. They were strong, yes, but brute force alone was not enough to win a fight. The gong sounded. The first warrior charged like a beast, aiming to crush Orion with his sheer weight. But Orion sidestepped, moving with effortless speed. The warrior's fist slammed into the ground where Orion had stood, cracking the stone. Before he could recover, Orion struck, fast and precise, delivering a blow to the warrior's ribs. The Xyrithian stumbled back, stunned. The second and third warriors attacked together, attempting to corner him. Orion ducked under a massive swing, then twisted his body to grab one warrior's arm and use his momentum to throw him over his shoulder. The crowd gasped. A human throwing the Xyrithian? Impossible. The last warrior tried to grab him, but Orion struck first, hitting a nerve in his leg. The warrior collapsed to one knee. Orion did not stop. He moved like a storm, delivering rapid, precise strikes until all three warriors were on the ground, defeated. The crowd was silent. Then, slowly, General Karen stepped forward. He studied Orion for a long moment, then gave a slow, respectful nod. "The princess has chosen wisely," he admitted. The nobles murmured, but no one dared object. The human had won. A silent conversation. Later that night, in the quiet halls of the palace, Lizara stood on a balcony, gazing at the stars. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Orion. "You didn't have to accept that challenge," she said softly. He leaned against the railing. "Didn't I?" She smiled slightly. "I suppose you did." There was a long silence between them, the weight of their history filling the space. Finally, Lizara spoke. "You never told me your real name." Orion smirked. "Does it matter?" She tilted her head. "Maybe not, but I never got the chance to thank you." Orion glanced at her. "You were just a kid back then. You didn't owe me anything." Lizara shook her head. "I do now." Orion didn't reply, but for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Belonging. The storm approaches, but far away, in the dark corners of the empire, enemies whispered. A human standing beside the throne was a threat to many, and they would not let it stand. Trouble was coming, and Orion was ready. The palace of Xiverus Prime stood tall and proud under the twin moons, its golden spires reflecting the soft light of the night sky. But inside its great halls, not everyone was at peace. Orion stood near the throne chamber, watching over Princess Lizara as she spoke with her advisors. The nobles had finally accepted him, at least in public, but he could still feel their resentment in the way they glanced at him. It didn't matter. He wasn't here to be liked. He was here to protect Lizara. The princess, however, was not as calm as she appeared. She could feel the tension in the room, the weight of unspoken words. She had forced the empire to accept a human as her royal guardian, but some still plotted in secret. Her suspicions were confirmed when General Karen approached her after the meeting. "Your Highness," Karen said in a low voice, "there are whispers of betrayal." Lizara's golden eyes sharpened. "From whom?" The general hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Some nobles fear that your decision will weaken the empire. They believe a human should not stand by your side. And I have reason to believe they are planning something against him." Orion, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. "Let them try." Karen gave him a hard look. "They are not simple cowards, human. If they strike, they will strike hard." Lizara clenched her fists. "We cannot allow it." Karen nodded. "I will investigate further. But be careful, Your Highness. You have made many enemies." With that, he left. Orion turned to Lizara. "They won't stop. You know that, right?" She met his gaze. "Then we will be ready." The silent assassins. That night, the attack came. Lizara's chambers were silent, the only sound the soft hum of the palace's security drones. She was resting in her private quarters, the weight of the day pressing down on her. But Orion did not sleep. He never let his guard down. His instincts proved correct when he sensed movement in the shadows. Then, a blur of motion. Orion moved in an instant, his reflexes faster than the eye could follow. A blade sliced through the air, aimed directly at Lazara's throat. Orion caught it mid-swing, twisting the assassin's wrist and slamming him into the ground. The attacker was not alone. From the darkness, 3 more assassins emerged, silent, deadly, their eyes glowing with malice. They were not ordinary killers. They were trained in the ancient ways of the Zarethian Shadow Order, an elite group that only answered to the highest-ranking nobles. This was a coordinated attack. Lazara woke with a gasp as the battle unfolded before her. Orion fought with precision, his movements flawless. He dodged a second blade, struck the attacker in the ribs, then spun around to block another strike. The assassins were fast, but he was faster. One assassin lunged at him from behind, but Orion ducked and countered with a crushing blow to the chest. The attacker staggered, coughing blood. The last assassin, realizing the battle was lost, made a desperate move. He turned toward Lazara. Orion saw the attack coming and threw his dagger. The blade pierced the assassin's shoulder, stopping him inches away from the princess. He collapsed, groaning in pain. The battle was over. Lazara stared at the defeated assassins, her heart pounding. Then she looked at Orion. He was breathing hard, his knuckles bruised, but he was unharmed. He had saved her. Again. The truth revealed. Guards stormed into the chamber moments later, weapons drawn. Karen was among them, his expression dark as he surveyed the scene. "Assassins," Orion said simply, kicking one of the unconscious bodies. Highly trained. Karen knelt beside one of them, inspecting his armor. His face hardened. These markings, they belonged to House Vexer. Lazara's eyes narrowed. Duke Vexer. He swore loyalty to the throne. Karen's jaw tightened. Lies. He has always been ambitious. If he sent assassins, then he seeks to remove you from power. Orion crossed his arms. Then we deal with him. Lazara nodded. This is an act of treason. We cannot let it go unpunished. She turned to Orion. Will you stand with me in this fight? He met her gaze, his voice unwavering. Always. But in the shadows of the Empire, greater dangers lurked. Duke Vexer was only the beginning. A storm was coming, and Orion would be ready. The grand halls of Ziveris Prime were no longer safe. The assassination attempt had changed everything. Princess Lazara knew now that the enemy was not lurking in distant battlefields, but hiding within the Empire itself. The name Duke Vexar echoed in every whispered conversation. A noble of great power, he had always spoken of preserving tradition. But now it was clear. He wanted the throne for himself. He saw Lazara's rule as weak, and Orion's presence as an insult to the Empire. But treason would not go unanswered. A public confrontation. The next morning, Duke Vexer arrived at the royal court, acting as if nothing had happened. He stood tall, his violet cape flowing behind him, his golden eyes filled with arrogance. Lazara sat on her throne, her expression calm but sharp. Orion stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his dagger. He had no proof that Vexer was behind the assassins, but he didn't need proof to know a snake when he saw one. Your Highness, Vexer said smoothly, bowing. I came as soon as I heard the dreadful news. Assassins in the palace. Unthinkable. You must be shaken. Lazara's gaze didn't waver. Indeed, it is strange how these assassins carried the mark of your house. The court went silent. Vexer did not even blink. A most unfortunate coincidence, I'm sure. Orion stepped forward. 3 assassins, all trained in your noble house's techniques. Either you sent them, or someone is working under your orders. The nobles murmured. Some glanced at Vexer with suspicion. The Duke chuckled. You put too much faith in a mere human's words, Your Highness. Perhaps he is the real enemy, whispering poison in your ear. Lizara's patience snapped. Enough. I will not be played for a fool. She stood, her voice filled with power. By royal decree, Duke Vexer is hereby under investigation for treason. Until the truth is uncovered, you are to remain in the capital, under guard. Gasps filled the court. Vexer's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. As you wish, Your Highness. But Orion saw something in his eyes. A plan. Vexer was not done yet. The escape and the betrayal. That night, under the cover of darkness, Vexer fled. By the time the guards reached his estate, his ship was already leaving the planet, escorted by a fleet of loyal warships. He had planned everything in advance. By morning, news spread across the empire. Duke Vexer had declared war. He called Lizara an unfit ruler and claimed that the empire needed stronger leadership. Many of the old nobles sided with him, their fear of change greater than their loyalty. It was a civil war. Preparing for battle, Lizara called an emergency war council. The holographic map of the empire floated above the table, showing the territories that had already fallen under Vexer's control. We must act quickly, General Karen said. If we hesitate, more will join his cause. Lizara's voice was steady. Then we marched to battle. The room tensed. Some of the generals hesitated. Vexer's forces were strong, but Orion smirked. Good, he said. I was getting bored. Lizara glanced at him. You're enjoying this. He shrugged. I don't like traitors, and I really don't like people who try to kill me in my sleep. Karen sighed. Your confidence is terrifying, human. Orion grinned. You'll get used to it. But beneath his humor, he was already forming a plan. Vexer was dangerous, but Orion had faced worse. A message from the enemy. As they prepared for war, a message arrived. A hologram from Duke Vexer himself. The image flickered, revealing the Duke seated on a golden throne. His expression was smug. Princess Lizara, he said smoothly, you cannot win this war. Your rule is weak. Your allies are uncertain, but I am merciful. He leaned forward. Surrender your throne, exile the human, and I will spare your people from destruction. The court erupted in anger. Orion chuckled. He really doesn't like me, huh? Lizara's golden eyes burned with fury. She stepped forward, staring directly at the hologram. You sent assassins to kill me, she said coldly. You betrayed the empire, and now you dare to demand my surrender. She took a deep breath. Here is my answer. She drew her sword and sliced through the hologram, shattering it. The message cut off. The room was silent. Then Lizara spoke. Prepare the fleet. We take the battle to him. Orion smirked. Now that's the spirit. War was coming, and Orion would make sure they won. The mighty Xaverian fleet stood ready in the void of space, its warships gleaming under the twin suns. Princess Lizara stood on the command deck of her flagship, the Celestial Wrath, her golden eyes locked onto the enemy forces gathering ahead. Duke Vexer's rebellion had grown stronger than expected. His fleet was vast, bolstered by defectors and mercenaries. His flagship, the Dread Sovereign, loomed in the distance, a dark titan of war. Tension filled the air as Lizara's war council prepared for battle. General Karen studied the battle map, his expression grim. Vexer has positioned his fleet at the edge of the Xaverian Nebula. If we attack head-on, we will take heavy losses. Lizara nodded. Then we must be smarter than him. Beside her, Orion leaned against the table, arms crossed. He wasn't a military strategist, but he had been in enough battles to understand one thing. Vexer was playing defense. He's waiting for us to come to him, Orion said, which means he thinks he has the advantage. Lizara looked at him. You have a plan. Orion smirked. I always do. The battle begins. The battle erupted like a storm of fire. The first wave of Xaverian warships charged forward, engaging Vexer's fleet in a furious clash of lasers and torpedoes. Explosions filled the darkness, debris scattering through space. Vexor's forces were strong, but Lysara had the superior strategy. While her main fleet engaged the enemy, Orion led a strike team on a dangerous mission. Their target? The Dread Sovereign. Orion, along with an elite squad of Xaverian warriors, piloted stolen enemy shuttles straight into Vexor's flagship. The deception worked. Vexor's forces thought they were reinforcements, until it was too late. The moment they landed inside, Orion led the charge. Blasters fired in every direction. As the team fought through enemy corridors, Orion moved like a ghost, dodging fire, taking down enemies with ruthless precision. His team pushed forward, cutting through Vexor's forces like a blade through darkness. The final confrontation. Orion and his team breached the throne room at the heart of the ship. There, seated on a golden chair, was Duke Vexor. He was calm, too calm. "You've come far, human," Vexor said with a smirk. "But you are too late." He pressed a button on his wrist. The ship's self-destruct sequence activated. Orion narrowed his eyes. "Really? That's your plan?" Vexor stood, drawing his ceremonial sword. "If I cannot rule the Empire, then neither shall she." He lunged. Orion dodged, drawing his own blade. The two clashed in a deadly duel, their weapons sparking with every strike. Vexor was skilled, but Orion was faster. He fought not with tradition, but with instinct. A final strike. Orion's blade pierced Vexor's chest. The Duke staggered, his golden eyes wide with shock. "This cannot be," Vexor gasped. Orion pulled his sword free. "It already is." Vexor collapsed. The rebellion was over. Escape and victory. The ship began to shake. The self-destruct countdown was nearing its final moments. Orion grabbed his communicator. "Lysara, Vexor is dead, but this ship is about to blow. Get us out of here." Within moments, Lysara's flagship locked onto their position. A bright blue light engulfed them. They were teleported to safety. Seconds later, the Dread Sovereign exploded, its destruction signaling the end of the rebellion. On the command deck of the Celestial Wrath, Lysara stood tall, watching the battlefield. Vexor's remaining forces, leaderless and broken, surrendered. The war was over. Lysara turned to Orion. "You saved me again," she said softly. Orion chuckled. "It's becoming a habit." Lysara smiled. But then she did something that stunned everyone. She removed her royal crown and knelt before Orion. Before the entire court, she spoke the words that no one expected. "You are not just my protector, Orion. You are my equal. And from this day forward, you will stand beside me as my chosen guardian." The court gasped. No Xaverian ruler had ever given such an honor to a human. But Orion just smirked. "Well," he said, "didn't see that coming." Lysara laughed. The Empire was safe, and the future had never looked brighter. But deep in Orion's heart, he knew this was only the beginning. The war was over. The rebellion had been crushed, and Duke Vexor was dead. The Empire had survived, but the wounds of battle would take time to heal. Princess Lysara stood on the balcony of the royal palace, gazing at the sky. The twin suns were rising, casting golden light over Xaveris Prime. Behind her, the grand throne room was filled with nobles, generals, and diplomats. They had gathered to witness a historic moment, the official recognition of Orion as the royal guardian. A human, standing beside a Xaverian ruler. It was unheard of. Yet, here he was. The ceremony of honor. Lysara turned to face the gathering. She was dressed in flowing silver robes, her golden eyes filled with confidence. She raised her voice so all could hear. "The Empire stands today because of one man's courage." She looked at Orion, a man who was once an outsider, but proved himself greater than any warrior in our history. The nobles whispered among themselves, unsure how to react. Some still resisted the idea of a human holding such honor, but none could deny the truth. Orion had saved the princess. He had fought in the war, and he had won. Lizara took a deep breath. From this day forward, Orion is no longer just my protector. She lifted a ceremonial blade and held it to his shoulder. He is my guardian of the throne, the first human to stand in this position. A moment of silence. Then, General Karen stepped forward and placed his fist over his chest. The Empire bows to strength. He looked at Orion. And you have proven yours. One by one, the nobles followed, accepting Orion as the guardian. Orion, who had been standing casually with his arms crossed, finally smirked. Does this mean I get a fancy title now? Lizara chuckled. It means you will always have a place here. For the first time, Orion felt something strange, a sense of belonging. Whispers of the future. After the ceremony, Lizara and Orion walked through the palace gardens. The war was over, but they both knew peace never lasted forever. Vexar's forces are scattered, but some of his supporters still remain, Lizara said. They will try to rise again. Orion nodded. Then we'll be ready. She glanced at him. You say we as if you plan to stay. Orion raised an eyebrow. You think I'd leave? After everything? Lizara smiled softly. No, I think you belong here now. For the first time in his life, Orion agreed. He had always been a wanderer, a soldier for hire with no home. But now, he had a purpose, a sudden warning. As they walked, a palace guard ran towards them, his face pale. Your Highness, a message just arrived. It's urgent. Lizara and Orion exchanged glances. The war had just ended. What could possibly be wrong now? The guard handed her a holographic device. Lizara activated it, and a blue image flickered to life. It was a distress transmission from one of the outer colonies. The voice was filled with fear. This is Colony Epsilon 3. We are under attack. Not by rebels, not by pirates. It's something else. Something we've never seen before. A loud explosion cut off the message. Then, a chilling sound echoed through the recording. An alien growl, deep and unnatural. The transmission ended. Silence. Orion exhaled. Well, that didn't take long. Lizara turned to him. Are you ready for another fight? Orion grinned. Always. The Empire had survived one war. But a greater threat was coming. And this time, it wasn't human.